Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I remember that day with a clarity that still surprises me, as if it were carved into my mind in slow motion. It was one of those ordinary Thursdays that seem completely harmless, the kind that begins with routine but ends in a way you never saw coming. I had just finished my morning coffee, the sunlight filtering softly through the half-closed blinds, casting long, lazy shadows across my living room. The scent of the day was familiar, warm, comforting, faintly of old books and the faint floral soap I always used. He called me that morning, his voice calm, almost casual. "It's routine," he said, as if the words themselves could carry away any tension. I knew him well enough to sense a subtle undertone, something unsaid, a whisper behind his calm. He had that way of speaking that made ordinary things sound simple, uncomplicated, safe. And that was why I trusted him without question. I agreed to meet him at the small cafe near the river, the one with the worn wooden floors and the faint smell of cinnamon and roasted coffee beans. It was quiet at that hour, almost empty, the kind of place where strangers' conversations feel like part of your own story because the world outside seems so distant. I walked in, feeling the soft hum of the morning, the low murmur of a barista's voice, the clink of cups on saucers. And there he was, already at a corner table, his posture relaxed, yet there was that familiar tension around his eyes that I couldn't quite read. I smiled, trying to mask the flutter of curiosity and apprehension that had been growing in my chest since he called. "Good morning," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He returned the smile, one that was easy, practiced, but the kind that reaches your eyes and somehow pierces the usual masks we wear. "It's routine," he said again, this time with a soft laugh, as if to reassure both of us. "Nothing serious." I nodded, but I could feel the pull of something more in the air. There's a strange kind of awareness that hits you when you sense someone is leading you somewhere without saying it outright. You can't resist, because part of you trusts them implicitly, but another part of you is already on high alert, sensing that what comes next might change your ordinary world. He asked about my work, my mornings, the little things I usually shared in passing. We talked about mundane things first, books I had read, the small renovation I had done in my kitchen, the garden I was trying to revive. But all the while, he observed, listening, the way he always did, making me feel heard in a way few ever had. There was a rhythm to his questions, gentle, deliberate, like he was preparing the stage without revealing the play. Then, just as I began to relax, thinking that perhaps it was just another ordinary meeting, he placed a small envelope in front of me. I hadn't noticed it before. It had simply appeared between us, unassuming, yet somehow heavy with the promise of what was inside. "I think you should open this," he said, his voice steady but softer now, a whisper that seemed to stretch across the table, wrapping around me like a quiet invitation. And my fingers hesitated. Something inside me screamed caution, while another part, the part that had trusted him for years, urged me to move forward. The cafe seemed to fade around me, the scent of coffee, the distant river, the quiet chatter of early morning patrons all became background to this singular moment. I opened the envelope slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Inside was a letter, handwritten, carefully. His handwriting, familiar, precise, almost elegant, flowed across the page, each word chosen with care. The first few lines were mundane, almost conversational, but then it shifted. It spoke of gratitude, of recognition, of moments I had taken for granted in myself, and in the world around me. It acknowledged things I hadn't shared, the small victories and quiet struggles, the invisible weight of days spent feeling unremarkable. My eyes blurred as I read, my emotions tightening around each sentence, the air thick with something unspoken but deeply felt. I looked up at him, unsure whether to speak or simply to stay in the moment. He met my gaze steadily, patiently, without a word, letting the silence speak volumes. And then he said something that I wasn't prepared for. "You've carried so much on your own. It's time someone noticed, truly noticed." The simplicity of the words hit me like a sudden wave. There was no fanfare, no dramatic reveal, just an honesty that felt almost revolutionary in its gentleness. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the realization of being seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. And that was the shock, the unexpectedness of being acknowledged, validated, and truly understood by someone I respected, someone I cared for. We stayed there for a long time, talking quietly, the letter lying between us, a bridge of trust and shared understanding. I realized that life often surprises you in the smallest ways, not with grand gestures, but with simple, profound recognition of your presence and value. By the time I left the cafe, the world felt subtly different, lighter somehow. The sunlight on my face, the breeze from the river, even the distant hum of the city felt infused with new meaning. And I carried that moment with me, a quiet reminder that sometimes, the most shocking experiences aren't about what happens to you externally, but what unfolds within, when someone helps you see yourself through another's eyes. It was routine, he said. But it was anything but. After that morning at the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling of being quietly transformed. The streets I walked that afternoon seemed different somehow, ordinary shapes and shadows taking on new textures, the sun a little warmer, the air a little softer. I realized that I had been moving through life carrying a certain numbness, a protective layer I didn't even know I had, and that letter had pulled it back, layer by layer, like someone gently brushing away dust from a long-forgotten photograph. A few days later, he suggested we meet again. This time, he wanted to take me somewhere less familiar, a place that held quiet significance for him. I hesitated briefly. After all, I had learned to measure my expectations, but something in the tone of his voice, calm and deliberate as ever, made me agree. There was a trust there, an invisible thread connecting us that I hadn't felt with anyone else in years. We drove in silence at first, the hum of the car blending with the soft strains of classical music he'd put on. The world outside passed in muted streaks of autumn color, the trees shedding their leaves in a slow, deliberate dance. I found myself observing him more closely, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the quiet focus in his eyes, the subtle expressions that revealed nothing yet conveyed everything. It was a kind of intimacy that was almost overwhelming in its simplicity. He led me to a small hill on the outskirts of town, a place I had never noticed despite years of living nearby. The path was narrow, lined with wildflowers and soft grass, and the top of the hill opened to a view of the valley below, the river winding lazily through the landscape. It was breathtaking, and I found myself momentarily speechless, caught between awe and gratitude. He leaned against a tree, motioning for me to sit beside him. "I come here when I need clarity," he said. "It's grounding." His words were simple, yet carried a depth that made me pause. I nodded, understanding more than he could have realized. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was full, weighted with shared understanding and unspoken recognition. After a while, he spoke again, this time with a vulnerability that felt almost fragile. "I wanted you to see this place because it's a part of me I don't usually share. It's private, but I trust you." The honesty in his voice, the openness of the gesture, moved me more than I expected. It was rare to encounter someone who not only sees you, but chooses to let you into their inner world. And yet, I realized, the shock of that morning hadn't been a one-time thing. It was unfolding gradually, in moments like this, where vulnerability and trust intersected in the most unexpected ways. I found myself talking, something I hadn't expected. I spoke about my own quiet spaces, the moments I carve out for myself, the small victories and unseen struggles that mark my days. He listened, truly listened, without judgment or interruption, nodding occasionally, letting me fill the space with my thoughts. There was a rhythm to our conversation, an ebb and flow that made me feel more alive, more present, than I had in years. At one point, I glanced down at my hands resting in my lap, feeling the warmth of the sun, the cool breeze brushing against my face. I realized I was smiling without even trying, a deep, unguarded smile that felt like a release. He noticed, of course, and his own expression softened, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "You deserve this," he said. The words were simple, yet carried the weight of sincerity, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Time passed without my noticing. The sky shifted in hues of gold and pink as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the hill. I felt a profound sense of connection, not just to him, but to the moment, to the world, to the possibility of experiencing life more fully. I realized that the routine he spoke of wasn't about predictability or sameness, it was about consistency in presence, in care, in attention. That consistency was what created the unexpected shock, a deep, resonant recognition that someone could see me, fully and without reservation. As we began our walk back down the hill, the conversation turned lighter, sprinkled with humor and small stories of our past. Yet, underneath it all, the weight of what had passed between us lingered. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a thread weaving through every word, every gesture, every glance. And I understood, perhaps for the first time, That moments of shock, true, meaningful shock, don't always come with drama or spectacle. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, leaving their mark through the gentle insistence of being seen, being acknowledged, being valued. By the time we reached the car, the sky had deepened into twilight, the valley below bathed in a soft, reflective glow. I felt a quiet gratitude, a sense of anticipation for what was to come, yet also a peaceful acceptance of the present. That day on the hill had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. And as he drove me home, I realized that the shock of recognition, of emotional clarity, was far more profound than any external surprise could ever be. I returned home that evening carrying a new awareness, a sense of presence I hadn't known I was missing. The routine he promised had evolved into something unexpected, a journey into understanding, connection, and a quiet, enduring respect that neither of us needed to define out loud. It was a beginning, though I didn't yet know where it would lead, and that uncertainty, paradoxically, felt like a gift. The days that followed felt charged with a quiet anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Life had a new texture to it, subtle but unmistakable, like the soft hum of a melody you only hear when you stop rushing through your own thoughts. Every morning, I found myself replaying that day on the hill, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the gentle wind against my skin, the way his words had landed in me like stones tossed into still water, creating ripples that seemed to reach into corners of myself I had long forgotten that we continued to meet. Gradually, almost as if the world was slowing down to accommodate the unfolding of something neither of us could quite put into words. One afternoon, he invited me to his studio, a place he had rarely allowed anyone to enter. It was tucked above an old bookstore, a quiet sanctuary filled with sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating canvases and sketches stacked neatly against the walls. The air smelled faintly of paint and old wood, a comforting scent that seemed to belong to him as much as it did to the space itself. He moved with an ease that suggested familiarity, a quiet command of his environment. As I walked in, I noticed little things, how the light caught the edges of his brushes, the way dust motes danced lazily in the sunbeams, the soft hum of the city far below. I felt a deep sense of being allowed into a secret, a world that was wholly his yet somehow shared with me. "Would you like to see something?" he asked, his voice calm, yet threaded with the kind of anticipation that makes you lean forward instinctively. I nodded, my curiosity heightened but tempered with the trust that had been steadily building between us. He led me to a canvas partially obscured by a sheet, and with a small, deliberate gesture, he unveiled it. I froze. The painting was of a garden, but not just any garden. The colors, the textures, the interplay of light and shadow felt like it had been pulled directly from memory, from the way I had described the small, neglected garden in my own home. It was breathtaking, but more than that, it was intimate. He had taken fragments of my world, pieces I had never considered significant, and rendered them with care and precision, as if to say, "I see you. I see the life you nurture quietly, and it matters." I felt a lump in my throat, a surge of emotion I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just the beauty of the painting, it was the acknowledgement behind it, the depth of attention, the quiet understanding that comes from truly seeing someone without expectation or agenda. I looked at him, and for a moment, words failed me. He simply nodded, as if reading my thoughts, his eyes steady and patient. "I wanted to capture this," he said softly. "Not for anyone else, not for praise. For you. For what matters to you." We spent hours in the studio that day, talking about art, memory, and the fragments of life that often go unnoticed. Each story, each laugh, each shared silence seemed to weave us closer, creating a space where vulnerability wasn't frightening but liberating. I realized that the shock of that first letter, the sudden recognition on the hill, had grown into something more profound, a sense of being understood in the way one rarely is in adulthood. At some point, I noticed the light shifting again, the golden hour casting long, warm shadows across the room. He suggested we step outside, and we did, walking along the quiet streets, the city winding down for the evening. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant bread ovens, and for the first time in a long while, I felt fully present, fully alive, fully seen. We stopped on a small bridge overlooking the river. The water shimmered under the fading light, reflecting gold and rose, a mirror of the sky above. We leaned against the railing, standing side by side in comfortable silence. And then he spoke, softly, deliberately. "Sometimes, the smallest gestures are the most powerful. The unexpected moments, the quiet attentions, they stay with you far longer than the dramatic ones. I nodded, understanding more than the words alone conveyed. There was a gravity in what he said, a truth that resonated deep within me. Life, I realized, is not only shaped by monumental events, but by the subtle, consistent acts of acknowledgement, presence, and respect. And in that moment, I understood that the shock I had felt initially wasn't just about being noticed, it was about the recognition that someone could honor my inner world, my daily struggles, my quiet victories, without judgment or expectation. We lingered there until the city lights began to twinkle on the river, each reflection a gentle reminder of time's passage. And as we walked back slowly, side by side, I realized that this experience, unexpected, gentle, profoundly moving, had already begun to reshape the way I viewed myself and the world. It was no longer routine, no longer ordinary. It was a living, breathing acknowledgement of existence, a quiet celebration of connection and trust, a moment I knew I would carry with me for years to come. By the time I reached home that evening, the sky was a deep indigo, dotted with the first stars. I felt a new kind of calm, a gentle energy that hummed beneath my skin. The experience wasn't over, it was simply unfolding, in layers, each one revealing more depth, more understanding, more of the profound beauty that comes when someone truly sees you, and you allow yourself to be seen in return. The weeks that followed felt like a gentle unraveling, a slow yet deliberate unfolding of moments I had never known could carry such depth. The shock of being truly seen had transformed into a steady rhythm of connection, subtle yet profound. Every meeting with him now carried layers of meaning that went beyond words, a kind of quiet intimacy born from trust, respect, and genuine understanding. One afternoon, he suggested we take a walk along an old trail just outside the city, a path that wound through trees whose leaves had begun their fiery transformation for autumn. The sun filtered through the branches in fractured beams, illuminating patches of ground and casting playful shadows. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, carrying with it the gentle nostalgia of seasons shifting. I felt an immediate sense of calm, as though the world itself had slowed to accommodate the experience we were about to share. He walked beside me, a few steps ahead at times, a few steps behind at others, matching the rhythm of my stride. We didn't need to speak. The silence was comfortable, weighted with the kind of understanding that only comes after consistent presence. Every so often, he would gesture toward a fallen leaf or a patch of moss, his observations gentle, almost meditative. And I realized, again, that the depth of attention he gave to the smallest details mirrored the attention he had given to me, the acknowledgement of my thoughts, feelings, and quiet struggles. Eventually, we reached a small clearing, a natural stage surrounded by towering trees. Sunlight streamed through in golden shafts, illuminating the mossy ground like a spotlight. He turned to me and said softly, "I wanted to bring you here because it's a place where I can think, reflect, and I wanted you to be part of that moment." There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, only an honesty that was rare and humbling. I nodded, my chest tightening with emotion I couldn't name. There was a quiet power in the ordinary, in being invited into someone else's private world, in the way trust was built one unspoken layer at a time. We sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, the sun warming our shoulders. He shared stories of his past, moments of vulnerability he rarely disclosed to anyone. I listened, feeling the layers of his life unfold like a delicate tapestry, each thread carrying weight and meaning. I shared my own reflections, the small victories, the challenges, the moments of doubt that had marked my days. For the first time in a long while, I felt heard, not just politely, but with genuine engagement, the kind that affirms your existence in a way that is both grounding and liberating. As the afternoon waned, the sunlight softening into a gentle amber, he handed me a small notebook. "I've been keeping some thoughts here," he said. "Nothing formal, just reflections. I wanted to share them with you because they matter to me, and I hope they matter to you too." Inside, I found pages filled with observations, reflections on life, gratitude, and quiet wisdom. Each entry resonated deeply, often echoing thoughts I had harbored privately but never spoken aloud. There was a sense of intimacy in reading his words, an acknowledgement of shared humanity that transcended ordinary conversation. I felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of gratitude and quiet astonishment at the depth of care embedded in such a simple act. We remained in the clearing until the light began to fade, the sky tinged with the soft purples and blues of dusk. As we walked back down the trail, the sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant bird calls felt more vivid, more alive, as if the world itself was attuned to the transformation occurring between us. I realized that the shock he had first brought into my life, the unexpected recognition, the profound attention, had matured into something enduring, a steady, quiet bond built on trust, respect, and mutual awareness. When I finally returned home, the evening sky was scattered with stars, each one a small reminder of the quiet miracles in everyday life. I sat by the window, reflecting on the days that had passed, on the unfolding journey, and on the simple truth that had become clear: true connection doesn't always come with fanfare. It arrives in moments of recognition, in attentiveness, in gestures that honor presence and humanity. He had shown me, gently and consistently, that the ordinary could hold extraordinary meaning. And as I closed my eyes that night, I carried with me a sense of calm, a newfound depth of awareness, and a quiet gratitude for the unexpected shock that had reshaped my understanding of connection, trust, and the beauty of being truly seen. The routine he promised had transformed completely. It wasn't routine at all, it was a living, breathing experience of care, attention, and quiet revelation, one I knew would linger with me for the rest of my days.